in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of a road trip, about to go confront my mom about the childhood photos she claims she doesn't have and the book that she doesn't want me to write. Most of my friends don't even know this, but I found out that I had moved to the US permanently in the parking lot of a McDonald's in Central Valley, California, when I was about middle school age. We had come to the US for a vacation, and nobody knew except for my mom that we were actually moving here permanently. You know, it's such an on-the-nose American way to find out that I was never going to go home again while eating one of those handheld apple pies. I didn't know this at the time, but my mom had been planning her escape for 2 years. 2 years she'd been plotting and planning how we were all going to move without anyone knowing. See, the thing is that my mom is a white woman who grew up in Montana, and she moved to LA in the 80s, and she met my dad, who is an Arab man from Saudi Arabia, who is studying there to go to flight school so that he could become a pilot, which he did. And then when he did, he moved back to Saudi Arabia, and with it he took his new bride, my mother, who had converted to Islam for this man and completely upended and changed her life for love. And you know what? It worked out for about 13 years, and then it didn't. There I am, 11 years old, bawling my eyes out into a half uneaten apple pie while my mom tells me that everything that we have with us, everything that we brought with us for vacation was all that we had. Everything that I'd owned, my whole entire life, all of my childhood that I'd left behind in my room, I was never going to be able to see again. Nothing. And she couldn't tell us because she didn't want anyone to know, and so she had to be really selective about the process. She didn't want to pack anything that would give us away, so we couldn't bring any extra clothing. We couldn't bring more than the small amount of luggage that we had, but she did decide that there were 2 things that she was going to try to smuggle with her in with the rest of the clothing. 1, a bag of jewelry. Remember this, it's important. That I think she was planning on selling at some point, surely not to remember my dad by. And the other thing that she decided that she was going to bring with her was several shoe boxes of photos. Now, this was actually kind of a difficult thing for her to do because you gotta remember, it was the early 2000s. There was no way for her to upload all the photos or scan them into the cloud. She had to take physical photos and she mixed them in with the clothing. I do believe that there is also at least 1 box of photos that is of my childhood and of my siblings' childhood and photos of my family that I haven't spoken to or seen since I moved here. I did not get a chance to say goodbye to them at all, and after I left, they all assumed that I was on my mom's side, so none of them were interested in speaking with me again. And I lost everyone that day and everything. I think that my mom does not want to give me these photos because after she moved here, she kind of shed her old life like a coat. She lives this lovely, hunky-dory life with this white man named Stanley. And I think she just wants us to all forget that it ever happened or that we're even Arab at all. She doesn't want me to look into this further is because the day that she was talking to me in the McDonald's parking lot, she told me the reason why we moved here. And the reason was 2 years prior, somebody, my dad's coworker, called her up and said, I have some bad news to tell you. Your husband is having an affair with one of our other coworkers. Well, you'd be thinking this might be some inappropriate information to tell an 11-year-old, and you're absolutely correct. There's no reason why I should have known that information. But the thing is, what my mom doesn't know is that I know exactly who my dad had an affair with. He was a pilot, and he was, of all cliches, having an affair with one of his flight attendants. And you want to know how I know? Because Linda has been to our house, and Linda has talked to me personally without my mom knowing. And Linda looks exactly like my mother. doesn't want me untangling this thread, because once I start untangling it, I think there is a lot of other information that I might learn, and a lot of it is not necessarily good. A little bit of both. Isn't that what the truth is? It's his side and her side, and it's somewhere in between. And I guess I'm telling you because I need to hear this story out loud so that I know what to say to her or what to ask when I get there. Because honestly, I don't really have a plan. I don't really know what's waiting for me. So I guess wish me good luck.
Hey, y'all, welcome back to All Things Jenny. I'm Jenny. This story has so many twists and turns, but when she said that she came to the United States not knowing that she was going to actually stay permanently, so she didn't get to tell her friends or anything, I felt that. Because when I was coming to the United States, and I don't know if this is for like all Haitians go through this or even Africans, but we were told not to tell anyone that we're coming to the United States, not even our cousins, not our friends. No one should be told that we're coming to the United States until we were actually here on that. So you know how that saying, don't let your right hand know what your left hand is doing, sort of thing? Well, it's the same thing. Don't tell anyone you're coming because you never know who's going to try to take you out or, try to wish bad upon like your travel and, just doing weird stuff. So it's like a thing where you don't tell people that you're traveling to the US or you're planning on going to the US until you actually make it to the US and they call you and you're like, oh, guess where I am? I'm in Miami. I'm in Miami because everybody in Haiti thinks everywhere in the United States is Miami, right? So, so yeah, like we were told not to tell anyone, but this lady's reason for not knowing is a completely different reason. I was not ready for that at all. Keep listening to the story. You'll see. Anyways, talk to you guys later. Listen to the rest of the story.
I completely agree. I'm Team Mom too. I'm glad that we're all in agreement here. I was angry in the video, but I'm not angry at my mom for making one of the hardest decisions that a human being can make alone with 3 children. She's incredibly brave, and I know that I don't know if I'd be that strong if I was in her position, so I incredibly commend her, and she did save my life. Probably not from what you think that she saved it from, though, but I am so appreciative of what she has done, and that's why I want to tell this story. And also, I've had 20 plus years of a relationship with her since that's happened. And also, that conversation in the McDonald's parking lot was the one and only time that we have ever discussed it. I think you can make really difficult and brave decisions and also still make mistakes and bad decisions after that. It's nuanced, and I think that's why I want to write this book, is because I want to present a nuanced version of these characters, a nuanced version of Arab characters and Arab families. I did get a chance to talk to my mom, and I am in possession of the photos. She is on board with this story, but I'm sorry to say there wasn't a good reason as to why she was keeping the photos. But after we discussed it, she was able to confirm some of the details that I already knew, and the story is incredible. I'm going to give you guys a part 2, but I do have to pack up everything and now actually drive home before I do that. It starts off with a plane crash, West Nile virus, an untimely death, an affair, stolen jewelry, immigration, 9/11, the FBI, and then a wicked stepmother. So there's a lot to unpack here. But before we get to that, there's a lot of questions that you guys had that I'd like to address before we get to the actual story. 1. A lot of you felt that I wasn't angry enough at my dad, and I just want to say that by the time we get to the end of the story, we are all going to be 1000% Team Mom. There's no other way for the story to end. And also, the chasm of negative feelings I have toward my dad are deep and wide, and don't worry, I am in therapy, and I have talked about it a lot. So, and yes, I have seen the movie Not Without My Daughter. And as much as I think that Sally Field is a national treasure and an amazing actress, I'm sorry to say that movie is very out of date and the characters are very flat. And it occurs in Iran, which is a very different geopolitical location than Saudi Arabia. Part of why I want to write this story is so that you guys can have other stories to relate to. And finally, a lot of you were really concerned about the plight of women in the Middle East and their ability to escape bad situations. And I completely agree. There is a way for you to directly help. This is Mariam Hassanat, and she is a woman in Palestine currently, Gaza, and she is pregnant and has a C-section scheduled. And this FundMe is to help her and her family get out of Rafah so that she does not have to go through a C-section without anesthetic. If you really wanted to help, you can donate to her cause. I am going to link Operation Olive Branch below, and you can click on the spreadsheet in their profile and scroll down to line 118 of the perinatal tab, and you will find link to Mariam's GoFundMe. And I just want to say, Free Palestine, and I'll see you all in the next part if you're still interested. We're going to tell the story. We're going to have to start from the very beginning. This is my mom, and this is my dad. They met while they were both living in Los Angeles and fell in love. They traveled the world together and decided to get hitched. They had a wedding in the US with her family, and then they had a second traditional wedding once she moved to Saudi Arabia. Although my mom had met some of my family members before actually moving to Saudi Arabia, she had also converted to Islam and she'd been studying Arabic, I don't think she was mentally prepared for the culture shock that was about to hit her. Something you should know about Saudi Arabia is that although it's a heavily patriarchal society, women run the household. If you knew any Middle Eastern men, you'd know that most of them are really big mama's boys, and their mothers tell them exactly what to do, and they will follow it no matter what, above anyone else. And my grandma was no exception. Although he was technically the head of the household, she definitely ran the show. And I don't think my mom knew that until she moved, especially because my dad and my grandma have a very close relationship. And this is where I need to give you a little bit of background about my family. My grandma got married at 16, which is really young, but not uncommon for the 50s in Saudi Arabia. And her husband was very religious, and he did not want any photos taken, but she begged and begged that he would take a photo with their son, my father. And he finally caved and decided, and he took one photo. This is the only existing photo of my grandpa and my dad, because the very next day, he had a sudden stroke and died in her arms. So imagine, she had just turned 18, I think, and became a widow. And I think because of that, it was just her and my dad for quite some time. Well, while they were trying to deal with the aftermath of this tragic loss, my grandpa's brother became close to my grandma, and they fell in love, and they ended up getting married, which is definitely unusual. And then they had 3 girls, so all my aunts are also actually my second cousins. And because of that, my dad is the only boy in the family, but he's also the only boy from her first husband. And so it was a really big deal for my dad to have a boy, especially for his firstborn. And unfortunately, they had me. There was a lot of pressure on my mom to assimilate. And although she was thriving in her workspace and she had a lot of expatriate friends and she got along with my aunt, her and my grandma butt heads a lot because we all lived in one building. See, this is really common that nuclear families extend beyond just your small little unit. Usually you live with your extended family. And it's one thing that I miss the most about Saudi Arabia is how much your community surrounds you constantly and you're not as isolated as you are here. So I lived in an apartment building where me and my mom and dad and siblings lived on the top left apartment, and then the top right was my aunt and my uncle and all my cousins, and then on the bottom floor was my grandma and my uncle. As you can imagine, living with your mother-in-law downstairs constantly pressuring you to have another child so you can have another boy, it was a little difficult, I'm sure. Things got really intense around the start of the first Iraq War. And at the time, the residents of Jeddah weren't sure if Saudi Arabia was going to be in the line of fire. So there was a lot of fear going on. And my mom had decided to take me and move back to the US, at least temporarily, until she could figure out what the situation was. And while she was there, I think a lot of her family members who weren't particularly happy with her marrying my dad in the first place did try to campaign for her to stay. And eventually, my dad told her that, hey, you've got a 48-month visa, and if you don't return, you will never be able to return again with your daughter to come live with us. And it would take us a lot longer to be able to get her a visa to be able to come back and be with the family. And so she decided to go back. And I think she thinks of this a little bit as, not that she regrets the decision, but it is a linchpin moment where things could have changed and she didn't. She went back. When she got back, she ended up getting pregnant with my sister, which we're so happy that she's here, but they still needed to keep on trying because we needed to get that boy. And, you know, they had a couple of failed miscarriages, and so they decided to go down the IVF route. And while they were down the IVF route, they were taking hormones, and before they'd even started, they got pregnant. And it turns out it was a boy, and everyone was really, really excited about this. And then things kind of shifted. During their IVF journey, my mom had asked if my dad would give up flying as a pilot for a while and take a desk job so they could focus on that. And he became a black box engineer. Not really sure what he did on a regular basis, but his job would have been to investigate a plane crash. And in 1996, the deadliest mid-air collision occurred over Delhi with my dad's airline, and it became his job to go and investigate that. He got a call in the middle of the night, and he packed up his bags and he left that morning. And he was gone for about 6 weeks. We saw all of it on the news, and I still think it is the #1 deadliest plane crash. Nobody survived, and frankly, it was absolutely horrific. He was gone for 6 weeks, and when he came back, the whole side of his hair was gray, and he looked like a completely different person. He was completely in it. There were photos of the plane crashes everywhere, and all the people who didn't survive and all their things, and there were recordings from the cockpit. And he was in his office for about a week, just holed up with this, and he wouldn't come out. And I think he kind of got sucked into the horror of it all. And then they called him again and they said, you know, there's nobody else who can be a spokesperson for the airline. We'd like you to come back out, and we'd like you to be the PR representative for the airline, since you know so much about what has already been going on. And although my mom begged him to stay because she was pregnant, he still went. And this is where my dad met Linda. See, the thing is that I got something wrong. She wasn't a flight attendant at all. She was a PR communication consultant that the airline had hired to help them deal with this communications issue. She was hired to train my dad for a couple of weeks, and he was gone for another 6. We don't really know what my dad was doing with Linda those 6 weeks, but I suppose it doesn't really matter. One of you had asked where my grandpa-uncle was during this time, or my grunkle, if you will. And this is a side note, but it's going to illustrate to you the lengths as to which my family is willing to go in order to keep a secret. When my mom first moved with my dad and she was meeting the rest of the family, she kept asking where my grandpa was, and nobody would answer her. They kept avoiding the question and not really discussing it and kind of looking off to the side. And she just figured that maybe he was traveling because that's just what somebody kept mumbling to her, right? So several months later, she's running errands with my dad, and they go up to this building, and he says, you know, women aren't allowed in this building, so just stay here and I'll come back and meet you. And over an hour later, he comes back, and my mom's pestering him like, where were you? What were you doing? And he said, oh, I was visiting my stepdad. And he still wouldn't answer any questions. And finally, my mom put her foot down and said, absolutely not. What is going on? Turns out that my grandpa was actually in jail. So the government of Saudi Arabia is run by an authoritarian theocracy. The Saud family is pretty much dictators, and their laws were a lot stricter back then than they even were now. My grandpa was actually pretty much a scoundrel and did not believe in adhering to a lot of the social norms that were agreed upon, specifically the laws around drinking and gambling, and I guess just partying a little too hard, because right before my mom had moved there, he had been caught running kind of like a speakeasy where he sold unlicensed beverages, and men would gather to gamble. And that's not looked upon well, because the morality police showed up and they arrested him, and he was taken to jail for, I think, somewhere around 9 months. But when he eventually got let out and my mom was allowed to meet him, my grandma was absolutely having none of it. None of it at all. And she said that she would not divorce him, and to punish him, she insisted on staying married and then sent him to go live with her mother and work for him so that she could watch over him. And I think that's hilarious. Anyway, so my grandpa uncle was banished to another city, and I didn't see him that often, and that's why my grandma ran the show, and that's why he wasn't really in the picture at this time. But for the most part, nobody really ever discussed this secret thing that had happened. And it seems like it's par for the course with this family that everyone kind of just sweeps all the difficult information under the rug. When my dad finally came back from investigating the plane crash, my mom tried to figure out where he was but couldn't find any information from him, and she even tried asking my grandma, who he claimed to have talked to almost every day, so she must know something, right? Well, nobody said anything. And her and my dad continued to fight and argue after he came back, all throughout the pregnancy, and it wasn't good. During this time, my mom had actually gotten bit by a mosquito and it got infected, and she turns out that they believe that it's something like West Nile virus, and she was really delirious, and my dad wasn't there because he was sleeping at my grandma's, and in the middle of the night she ended up falling and it hurt her and the baby, and she ended up going to the hospital, and unfortunately she lost the baby at about 7.5 months, and it was traumatic for everyone. After that, nobody was fighting. Obviously, of course, everyone, the family rallied together, but there was this marked silence that just descended over everything. Mom was down for a long time, as was my dad. And after some time and some healing, they decided to go on the original IVF journey that they were going to take, since the first time they never got a chance to use it because they accidentally got pregnant, and so they decided to move forward with it. And it worked, and it was successful. And if you know anything about the way IVF works, they take multiple embryos and they implant them, hoping that one of them will attach. And surprise, all 3 of them attached, and my mom was set to have triplets, which I think really freaked everyone out. Dad decided at this point it would probably be a good idea to give up his desk job now that the investigation was done, and he could go back to flying and accept a little bit more work now that he was preparing for 3 children to come into the picture. Eventually, the other 2 embryos got absorbed, which my brother likes to say that he has the strength of 1 man and 2 babies, but at first they were really scared, and they didn't know for a while that it was only going to be 1 baby. So for at least 3 or 4 months, they thought it was triplets. And as my dad was flying and accepting more and more trips, relationship with my mom had started to get better, and he would come back from each trip and he'd bring her these presents. And there was one specific present that I remember that he brought her was this really pretty jewelry. And it had her initial and some crystals on it. Around this time, my parents decided to have a get-together with some of his work friends and some of hers so that they could celebrate. And this is the party that I remember specifically because my dad has had some of his friends over, but that's pretty boring. This one was memorable because there were some of his female coworkers, the flight attendants, and they all came to celebrate my mom, and in attendance was Linda, and that is why I thought she was a flight attendant. Now, this occasion stands out to me because at one point in the party, I wasn't really supposed to be there because I was little, but I wanted to sneak in and hang out with the adults. That she came up to me and she knelt down and she said, "Wow, you are so pretty. I love the bracelets that you're wearing. Did your dad give those to you?" And I loved the attention, and so I told her everything that she wanted to hear. And then she asked me, "Does your dad ever give your mom jewelry?" And of course, I answered because I love to be helpful. And then she asked me, "Has your dad ever given your mom a necklace with her initials on it? Would you be able to go get it for me so that I can see it?" And I don't know what happened. I'm sure somebody caught me and sent me to bed. I obviously didn't get her the necklace. But when my mom told me in the McDonald's parking lot, I remembered this occasion, and all of a sudden I put two and two together. And I've got to say, if I recognized that more than likely the necklace that Linda was wearing was very similar to the type of necklace my mom was wearing, I'm sure my mom caught on too. And I'm pretty sure this is where she realized things were a bit off. I don't know why, but my mom didn't say anything to him right away. Probably because she was waiting for more evidence. That feeling that women get in the pit of their stomach where they know something's off, but they don't know exactly what. She got her answer when at one point my dad was on a work trip and she needed to have him sign some medical information. And normally when he's traveling, she would just fax it to the hotel that he was staying at. And he told her that he was staying at a certain hotel in New York. And so she called them up and asked for the room number or the fax number. And they said, "Sorry, ma'am, but there's nobody staying here by that name." And so, panicked, my mom called my dad's work and she asked, "What's going on? Did I get the hotel wrong? Can you give me the new information?" And somebody said, "Hold, please." And then one of my dad's friends got on the line, someone that she knew, and he said, "I'm so sorry, ma'am. We told him not to do this to you." When he came home from that trip, she said that she sat him down and she had a talk with him about just all sorts of things. And at the very end, she said, "Is there a secret that you've been keeping from me?" And he said, "No." And she asked again, "Is there something that you need to talk to me about?" And he said, "No." And they both stared at each other in silence. And I think they both knew what the other one knew. My mom got up from the table and she kept it to herself. And after that, I think my dad's trips toned down again. They kind of tapered off, and he started being a lot more religious and a lot more dedicated. And my mom became a lot more quiet, and she just became focused on the baby, my brother. And I believe this is where she had started percolating the idea of leaving, because obviously she couldn't leave then. She had just started a pregnancy and a pretty difficult one, so she needed to stay put. And I think maybe she thought things would get better in that time frame, and also maybe started planning her backup. After my brother came, and I'm sure the novelty of a new baby wore off, I think my mom had realized that things had crystallized in her marriage and it was time for her to make a decision. And the opportunity presented itself when, after a year of my brother being born, my dad had a business opportunity in the US. He wanted us to go with him while he took care of that. So he was going to be in Florida for a couple of months and we were going to go stay with him on vacation. And while we were traveling over, this is when my mom planned the break. She told him, "You go to Florida, set everything up. I'm going to go visit my parents in California for a couple of weeks and then we'll meet you." And this is where my mom decided to leave him and file for divorce. And the only way that she could get the US laws on her side is if she filed for divorce from California. A lot of you mentioned the movie Not Without My Daughter, and I just want to say that my mom actually knows Betty Mahmoudi, the woman that movie is based off of. So she knows the real story. And when she got there and decided to file for divorce, Betty Mahmoudi is the person who helped my mom get a lawyer and is probably the person who's responsible for my ability to be here. As you can imagine, my dad was not pleased. He claims he was blindsided, but I don't know how he could have been. And the divorce was not fun or pretty. I think he wanted very badly to have more custody and more rights. And I think because my mom was insisting on staying in the US and my dad lived in Saudi Arabia, he really didn't have much that he could ask for because we couldn't go to visit because of his status as a pilot. He would be able to, if he wanted to, make us stay, but my dad never threatened that, but my mom was always afraid of the legality issue there. What ended up was my mom got full custody and my dad was allowed some visitation rights, but only if he came to the US. And part of the divorce settlement agreement was that he would agree to send all the childhood boxes, all our things that we had needed, and back in Saudi Arabia, needed to be packed up and shipped to us. It was part of the divorce settlement, and he agreed. And so even though they spent that first, I don't know, I think year or so going back and forth, they decided to agree on that, and my dad went back to the US, or went back to Saudi Arabia so that he claimed that he could pack everything up and bring it back to us and that he would sign the divorce papers. When I told you that I actually haven't seen any of my family anymore, that's not true because I've seen 2 of my family members since I've moved back here. My dad and my cousin. When my dad came back to bring us our things and the photos, he brought with him my cousin. And my cousin is maybe a couple months older than me, and she was my absolute best friend. We spent all of our time together. She was everything that I wanted to be and everyone I told my secrets to. So I was so excited that she was going to come for the summer, and this was the summer of 2001. And I think he thought that he was going to maybe reconcile with my mom or win her over or spend the summer with us and then convince her not to sign the divorce papers. I don't know what was going through his head, but he came and he stayed with us, and he stayed on the couch, and my cousin stayed with me, and we spent the summer together kind of in this cognitive dissonance of, oh, nothing's happening. It was one last glorious summer. Eventually, my mom impressed upon him that nothing was going to change and he needed to sign things. But you should know that he only brought the photos. He did not bring anything else. He just brought the photos and claimed that, oh, he couldn't fit it all or that he forgot and that he would just ship it. Yeah, right. After much hemming and hawing, he signed and everything was finalized, and him and my cousin, after spending the summer with us, were set to fly back to Saudi Arabia on September 14th. But my aunt called us a couple weeks beforehand and said that my cousin had this big important thing that she needed to do before the school year started, so she asked my dad to change flights. And he changed his flights from September 14th, 2001 to September 8th. And they left early, and I was so upset. But honestly, if they did not leave 3 days earlier, all of our lives would be completely different. Because everything changed after 9/11. For everyone. For the whole country. And definitely for me. Like a lot of people who watched the news that morning, I didn't realize the enormity of the situation or how it would affect me. That didn't hit me until the FBI showed up. That morning of September 11th, I showed up to school and you could feel something was off in the air. We were all waiting to line up to get into the classroom. And then the coolest kid in my class, and kind of had a little crush on him, turned and pointed at me and said, "You, didn't your people do this? Aren't you from there?" I didn't say anything. What could I say? Everyone stared at me, and we all just shuffled into class. I think like a lot of people, we spent the rest of the day just watching TV, my teacher crying. When I went home that day, I didn't mention anything to my mom because why would I? I just kept it to myself. And I thought it would all just go away until 2 days later, I showed up after school and there were two big black SUVs, unmarked cars in our driveway. And it was obviously the FBI. There were people that I went to school with in my neighborhood, and I'm sure somebody saw, I don't know who, but it got out. And I learned very quickly to shut that part of myself down. I kept who I was and where I was from and my family and my past to myself. And if you remember that time or you lived through it, you remember that air of paranoia and just fear that was everywhere. And yeah. My mom later told me that the FBI were doing their due diligence. They were following up on the fact that my dad had a flight planned for the 14th of September and then quickly changed it to the 8th, and that was suspicious, I guess, because he was pilot and Saudi, and they didn't have anything else to follow up on, but the damage was done at school. And, you know, I didn't talk about it with my mom at the time. We just kind of ignored it. And then we did our best to kind of survive and get along. Later that year during Ramadan, I was talking to my mom on the way home from school about how I wanted to prepare for fasting and what I wanted to do to celebrate. And then we pulled into the driveway and she turned to me and said, you know, just because you participate in Ramadan doesn't mean that you're Muslim. And she got out of the car and she walked into the house and left me to contemplate the weight of God by myself. I took that to mean that she didn't mind if I practiced, but that I should keep it to myself. And I'm ashamed to admit that I let that affect me. And to this day, I am in awe of people who have Iman or faith because I see that it provides such solace. And although I've landed at a different place spiritually, it is still something that I regret. After that year, my dad applied for visas to come and visit us, but they never got approved. And so he couldn't come here and we couldn't go there to visit him. And so we were relegated to phone calls. And at first it was every other week and we were catching up on schoolwork and what was new. And then it became every month, and then it became every other month. And then it just slowly tapered off because each conversation was almost exactly the same as the last one. And my siblings were 5 and 9 at the time, and so they probably weren't as excited about it. And he got busy with work, and then the calls were fewer and far between. It stayed that way until the penultimate call with my dad. For a long time, my mom made us really weary and fearful of sharing too much information with him or with our family or what we posted online or what we told our friends, mainly because I think she was afraid that might get back to him and would affect our relationship negatively. For most of my life, I'd been waiting for this big, huge fight, this disownment that was going to happen where he found out who I was and was going to cut me out of his life. And you know what? It just wasn't like that. Sometimes the world doesn't end with a bang. It just ends in a whimper and fades out. I was a sophomore in college and it had been probably over a year since I'd heard from him last. And I saw his phone number. I picked up right away. And he told me that he was calling to let me know that he was getting married. His mother had set him up with another divorcee, an Arab woman this time, who had a child from her previous marriage. And he told me that she was 24 And I reminded him that she was only 4 years older than me. And then he told me that I should inform my siblings that he unfortunately could no longer help pay child support because he needed to focus on his new family because she was going to have a baby. And I didn't say anything negative. I congratulated him and I said goodbye. And although that wasn't the very last time that I would talk to him, it was years until we spoke. It wasn't until I ran into my cousin again that I realized that I needed to reach out to him one last time. After I found out that my dad was marrying a 24-year-old, I circled the drain for a long time, chasing chaos, until I ran into my cousin again after 15 years and faced what I consider to be my mid-level boss. In my 20s, I struggled a lot. Like a lot of people, I was broke, had low self-esteem, I couldn't get a good job, I had terrible living situations and even worse relationships. And I was trying to kind of claw myself out of the situation that I had created. And I'd started applying for jobs, trying to take my career seriously. I got in a job interview in San Francisco and I'd posted about it. And then I got a DM from my cousin, who I hadn't spoken to at all since September 8, 2001. After I had kind of stopped talking to my dad, or at least the communication with him had dwindled, I didn't speak to her again. I'd wondered about her all these years. Remember, she was my best friend. I hoped she was doing well. I hoped she wasn't mad at me. I wondered what life was like for her. And also, you have to remember that my mom was super impressed upon us that we should be very careful about what we post and who we talk to and what type of information that we let out. So even though I had wanted to reach out to her all these years, I was kind of afraid. I don't know of what really, but I just was. And so when I got that message from her, I was terrified. And she said that she was actually living in the Bay Area and that she wanted to meet up while I was there. And even though I was scared, I agreed. And we made a plan to meet up and have lunch. Okay, this part is the part that I've been scared to talk to you guys about. And I hope that you take this with a grain of salt. Because I want you all to know that I am so very glad that my mom made the choices that she did. And if she gave me the option, I would have chosen to come with her. And also, you have to imagine what it's like that here I was facing someone who is almost exactly my same age. And they're basically the bizarro version of me, the version that ended up staying. That lived the life that I would have had if I'd stayed. And let me tell you, I probably did not handle this situation as I should have. I showed up to her meeting after having this terrible interview that I'd bombed, wearing clothes that I'd probably gotten from the thrift store and Target and was a little bit threadbare, even though I was trying to look my best, and I had no money, and my life felt like an embarrassment at that point. And when I showed up, I felt like a little kid. And when she showed up, she was like a woman. It was like a teenager having lunch with Amal Clooney. Like, the chicest woman was sitting across from me with the most amazing manners. And she told me that she was there because her husband was going to the Berkeley School of Business and she was going to the San Francisco Academy of Art. And she was married to someone that she loved. It wasn't a forced marriage, and she had a beautiful baby, and she had like a family and a support system, and she looked so put together and so happy. And I am so ashamed because I was so incredibly insecure and I felt so embarrassed about my life. And it didn't help that, I swear to you, 2 separate people throughout the course of several hours that we were talking came up to her to ask for her number, and then a third person asked if he could take her photo, which she declined. But it definitely drove home how insecure I felt in that moment.
what we ended up talking about, one of the first things that she'd said was, well, you know, when you chose to leave. And I had to correct her and say, you know, I would have left with my mom, but nobody gave me the option. This was a surprise to me. And this is where she revealed to me that the reason why my family never called or never tried to get in contact with us after we left is because my dad told them that I didn't want to talk to them, that I was not interested in having a relationship with them. And also, I ended up sharing her the reasons why we left, and she had no idea. And he'd kept that from everyone as to the real reason as to why my mom left, and he'd painted the story as if it was completely out of the blue. And I think he probably did this to save face, to not have to actually deal with the scenario that he had created out of his own actions. Instead, he threw me under the bus and blamed the reason why my brother and sister are not religious and they don't speak Arabic is because I didn't care enough to take up the helm from him. And honestly, that I was not expecting that. I did not know that that's what they had been told. And she also revealed to me that when my dad got married to his second wife, that he still was in possession of all our things. He had kept them in our rooms this whole time waiting for us to come back. And that when he'd gotten married, that she had unpacked everything and gone through all of it, picked out the things that she liked best and kept them for herself, and then trashed the rest of it. And I'm glad that part of it is getting used, but I really wish that she would have just allowed him to send the rest to me and my brother and sister, because we probably would have really enjoyed to have had that in our possession. The conversation with my cousin was really difficult, but I'm so glad I ran into her. I learned a lot, and it was the catalyst for the next big thing that I had to face. Side note, I just want to let you know that my cousin then, after that, she ended up moving to Dubai with her husband, who is very successful, and she has this very beautiful family, and she started her own luxury business in the department of art that she graduated from, and it became so popular that she is now a reality TV host for that particular field of art in the country that she lives in. And so her life, I know from the outside, looks so perfect, and I follow it, but I think for a long time I was so ashamed of where I was in life that after that conversation, I didn't follow up with her, and I didn't maintain the relationship that I wish that I had, mainly because I felt like our lives were so different and I wasn't happy with mine. After I talked to her, I reached out to my dad, and I thought that I was going to have this conversation where I was going to get to ask him about all these things that he'd told the family. And as soon as he picked up, all I said to him was, I know it's been so long, but I really want to have a relationship with you. I'd like you to try to get to know who I am as an adult. And he had even said, oh, well, you know, when you chose to leave. And I corrected him and I said, you know, again, I had to repeat the same thing over again. It was like, I still, despite all of that, I know it happened, but despite all of that, I still want you to try to have a relationship with me. And he said, you know what? I agree. I would like that very much. He interrupted and said he needed to go do the Maghrib prayer, which is the dusk prayer, and that he would give me a call the next morning. And then the next morning came, and he didn't reach out, and I waited until the evening, and I texted and I said, hey, did you want to reschedule for tomorrow? Are you busy? And he never responded. He just ghosted me, probably for the same reasons why he lied to the family, because it's easier to do that than to face what you've done. After that, I kind of just didn't care. I thought that I'd faced everything, that I had faced the big boss. I was done. I was over. And I just ignored it, and I threw myself into my career, and I had a whole bunch of adventures. I started working for a TV chef. I traveled the world. I picked a lot of bad work situations and a lot of worse living situations and some terrible relationships. And I just chose chaos until I finally realized that I needed to turn around and face it all. Started writing to tell the humanity of this story in the hopes of trying to find my own humanity. And I hope that you've found something in it too. If you've made it this far, I hope you've gained some perspective that maybe you didn't have before, or you've learned a little bit about Arab culture that you might not have. And if you have your own story to tell, I really hope that you have the strength to face it, even if it's hard. If you would like to help Middle Eastern women, pregnant Middle Eastern women, leave the bad situations that they're in, I have several clickable things in my profile that you can go to if you'd like to donate. Be good.